Tuesday morning. The Manhattan kitchen was awash in soft golden light, the smell of fresh coffee curling through the air. It should have been another ordinary morning, one of hundreds, just like it during our 7 years of marriage. But the phone call from my younger sister Kay, an airline pilot, shattered that illusion in seconds. "Ava, can you answer something strange for me?" Her voice crackled through the line, muffled by the hum of instruments in the cockpit. Kay never called before a flight, ever. For her professionalism in the cockpit was sacred. No small talk, no distractions. Before we dive into true revenge stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. I froze my eyes, drifting toward the living room, where Aiden, my husband, sat in his usual spot, newspaper spread wide, glasses slipping down his nose. "Yes," I answered slowly. "He's right here, sitting in the living room." There was a pause, a silence so heavy it seemed to press against my chest. I could hear her breathing, uneven and sharp. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. "That can't be true, because right now I'm looking at him boarding my flight to Paris with another woman. He just sat down in seat 3B. My fingers tightened around the ceramic mug until I thought it might crack. My pulse pounded in my ears. My rational mind screamed, impossible, completely impossible. And then before I could react, the living room door opened behind me. Familiar footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor. Aiden walked into the kitchen. He carried the coffee mug I'd bought him for his 40th birthday, the white one with the words, "World's Most Adequate Husband," printed in bold black letters. He had laughed when I gave it to him, saying he never trusted anyone who called themselves the best. At the time, that self-deprecating humor had seemed charming. Now it felt like a cruel joke. "Who's calling this early?" he asked, casually moving toward the coffee machine for a refill. His tone was light, easy, unbothered. I forced my face to remain calm. "Just Kay," I replied, slipping my phone onto the counter. "Oh, her again?" he chuckled, pouring himself more coffee. "She keeps telling us to take advantage of those flight perks she gets. Maybe we should finally say yes." The irony of his words twisted my stomach. On the other end, Kay hadn't hung up yet. Her breathing was still in my ear, urgent, waiting for me to respond. But instincts honed over 20 years as a forensic accountant held me steady. In my career, I'd sat across from CEOs and CFOs who were masters of deception, men who stole millions with a straight face. If I'd learned anything, it was this: the person who panics loses the upper hand. "I'll call you back," I whispered, ending the call. Aiden glanced up from his phone. "Everything okay? You look a little pale." I caught my reflection in the microwave door. The same auburn ponytail, the same green eyes my father had passed down, the same face I'd seen every morning for 37 years. But nothing felt the same anymore. It was as if I'd just realized a picture frame had been hanging crooked on the wall for years. "I'm fine," I said evenly. My voice sounded almost normal. My hands steady on the counter, though inside my stomach was in knots. "You should go back to bed," he said warmly, setting down his cup. "You were tossing and turning all night." He brushed a kiss against my temple, a gesture so familiar it should have comforted me. Instead, it chilled me. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Kay lit the screen. "You need to see this." I swiped it open. My breath caught. The photo was taken through an airplane window, business class, seat 3B. A man in a tailored blue Tom Ford suit leaned toward a young blonde woman, a glass of champagne in his hand. His profile was clear, the sharp jawline, the slight curve of his mouth, the way he gestured when he spoke. It was Aiden. I looked up. The man in my kitchen wore a gray cashmere sweater, glasses pushed up into his hair, our wedding band gleaming on his left hand. He was smiling at me, completely at ease. The man in the photo, my husband, was 30 miles away at JFK boarding a flight to Paris with another woman. Both realities couldn't be true. One of them had to be a lie. The kitchen felt smaller after that call. Every clink of silverware, every hum of the refrigerator seemed amplified, like the world itself was straining to hold two versions of my husband in one place. I turned away from Aiden, the Aiden standing in my kitchen, and stared at the phone lying face down on the counter. Behind that darkened screen was the photo my sister had just sent. One version of my life captured through a window at 30,000 feet. The other was sipping coffee 3 feet away from me, humming as if nothing in the world was amiss. I needed answers, but I also knew better than to demand them outright. Panic would tip my hand. If the man in front of me was a fraud, confronting him too soon could erase the very evidence I needed. And if somehow this was all some cruel mistake, I'd be branding myself paranoid without proof. So instead I did what I'd been trained to do. I set a test. Actually, I said, reaching into the pantry, I think I'll make pancakes. Aiden glanced up, startled. Pancakes on a Tuesday. He smiled as if amused by the novelty. What's the occasion? I forced a light laugh. Can't a wife cook breakfast for her husband without needing a reason? The words tasted like ash in my mouth. In truth, there was a reason. Pancakes were our Saturday ritual, reserved for slow mornings when I wasn't buried in audit reports and he didn't have squash at the club. For 7 years, never once had we broken that tradition. Making pancakes on a Tuesday was as out of character as wearing a cocktail dress to do the grocery shopping. Still, he shrugged, that familiar half-smile on his lips. Of course. You know I've got squash at 11, but there's plenty of time. I pulled flour and eggs from the pantry, milk from the fridge. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory built from years of the same motions. But my mind was elsewhere, racing back through the last few months, hunting for cracks I'd smoothed over with trust. The conference in Boston I couldn't verify online. The perfume I didn't recognize lingering on his jacket. The way his old habits, the socks he used to leave balled up at the foot of the bed, the tendency to forget our anniversary until the very last minute had all but vanished. Back then I told myself it was growth, that he'd matured, that after years of therapy and marital counseling, maybe the sessions had finally sunk in. But there was something else I couldn't ignore anymore. For 3 months, we hadn't been intimate. At first, the distance made sense. He'd said his doctor had prescribed new medication for his insomnia, and the side effects made him feel off. He insisted our therapist suggested we focus on emotional closeness before physical intimacy to reset the rhythms of our marriage. And honestly, part of me had been relieved. After long days unraveling other people's financial deceptions, sometimes it felt easier to retreat into sleep than to reach for each other in the dark. But now, with Kay's photo burning in my mind, the abstinence felt less like healing and more like preparation. I cracked an egg into the bowl, my hand steady, even as my chest tightened. "I love you," Aiden said suddenly, stepping close enough to press a kiss to my temple. My body flinched before my mind could stop it. "I love you too," I answered automatically, the words hollow. "If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me." He returned to his newspaper, turning the pages with precise, deliberate movements. Too precise, like an actor who had studied not only the role, but the smallest gestures that gave the performance weight. The smell of butter sizzling on the griddle filled the kitchen. For a moment, it was almost enough to make me forget the gnawing suspicion in my gut. Almost. I slid the first pancake onto his plate. He smiled, fork in hand, the picture of a content husband. But I couldn't look at him without thinking of the photo, his identical profile angled toward a woman in seat 3B, her manicured hand resting casually on his arm. Which one was the real Aiden? The man eating pancakes in our kitchen? Or the man boarding a plane with another woman? And more terrifying still, what if neither of them were? I reached for my phone under the pretense of checking a recipe. My screen lit up with another text from Kay. Just 5 words, engines running, door closed. My stomach dropped. The plane was already taxiing. Too late to stop him. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my face carefully neutral. "Delicious," Aiden said, mouthful, lifting his mug for another sip of coffee. "Glad you like it," I murmured, but my mind was far from the kitchen. This wasn't about breakfast anymore. This was about survival, about truth, about uncovering what had crawled into my life and put on my husband's skin like a costume. And if there was one thing I knew from 20 years of tracking fraudsters, it was this: every deception leaves a trail. You just have to know where to look. The apartment door clicked shut behind Aiden as he left for his squash game gym bag slung over his shoulder. I stood by the window watching his familiar stride disappear around the corner. To anyone else, he looked like the picture of routine. To me, he was the embodiment of a question I no longer knew how to answer. Who was I married to? The moment he was out of sight, I turned and headed for his office. Aiden's office had always felt more like a showroom than a workspace. The mahogany desk we'd bought at an estate sale gleamed like glass. His diplomas from Cambridge and Harvard Business School were framed with surgical precision. Even the pens in the leather holder sat in a perfect diagonal. Too perfect. I knew from experience that organization often camouflaged chaos. I sat down at his computer, my pulse steady despite the storm in my chest. Years of unraveling multi-million-dollar frauds had trained me to treat numbers like witnesses. They might not speak, but they never lied. I logged into our joint account. At first glance, everything looked normal. Mortgage payments, utilities, credit card, auto payments. But I dug deeper. That's when I found it. March 15th, Mandarin Oriental, Tokyo. 3 nights room service for 2 spa treatments. I remembered that weekend perfectly. He'd told me he was in Connecticut helping his mother clean out the garage after his father's death. I'd even offered to go with him, but he insisted I rest after a brutal audit cycle. I scrolled further. Another charge, 4 Seasons, Boston. That same weekend, I'd been too sick with food poisoning to move from bed. Supposedly, he was at client dinners. The receipts showed champagne caviar and a Cartier bracelet I'd never seen. My hands tightened on the mouse. These weren't client gifts. These weren't business dinners. They were dates. And then I saw the transfers. Always $9, $999, never $10, $1,000. Just below the threshold that would trigger automatic fraud alerts, quiet siphons of our savings dripping into accounts I didn't recognize. Cayman, Panama, Cyprus. I leaned back, my breath finally hitching. This wasn't just infidelity. This was theft. A methodical gutting of the life we'd built disguised with the same precision he used to fold his pocket squares. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in months, Sophia Chen. Sophia and I had met in the NYU accounting program. Back then, she was ambitious, brilliant, sharp enough to slice steel. Life had cut her harder. Her husband's affair with a 23-year-old assistant had ended in divorce, shoving her out of corporate finance and into what she called private intelligence. Translation, she dug into messy personal cases with the same ferocity I used on Fortune 500 audits. She answered on the second ring. Ava. 15 minutes. I said, my voice lower than usual. Bring everything you've got. I need a second set of eyes. There was no hesitation. On my way. While I waited, I kept digging. Business credit card charges at restaurants he never mentioned. Jewelry receipts with no matching gifts. Flights I couldn't account for. My marriage was crumbling into data points on a spreadsheet. The doorbell rang sharp and decisive. I opened it to find Sophia in her trademark all-black outfit tablet clutched to her chest. Her eyes scanned my face once, registering what she already suspected. "This isn't just cheating, is it?" she asked as I led her inside. "No," I whispered. "It's bigger. Much bigger." She set her tablet on the dining table, fingers flying across the screen with practice speed. Within minutes, she pulled up images I hadn't seen before. Aiden with a woman half my age, at a hotel bar, at a gala, at a restaurant I didn't recognize. "Her name's Madison Vale Sophia," said grimly. "Pharmaceutical sales rep. 26. And Ava. This didn't start last week. Based on her digital footprint, this has been going on for months." The world tilted under my feet. Months! Sophia slid another screen toward me. "And there's more. Building security footage. Your building's archives have been tampered with." "Deep fake," inserts Ava. "Whoever's running this isn't just sloppy cheating. It's coordinated, expensive, and professional." I stared at the footage. My husband's image flickered unnaturally under the chandelier. A fake shadow, a doctored timeline. It wasn't just betrayal, it was an operation. And in that moment I realized I wasn't just living with a liar, I was living inside a crime scene. Sophia and I replayed the footage again and again. On the surface it looked like Aiden, same stride, same suit, same confidence. But the details were wrong. A shadow that flickered under the chandelier, a reflection that lagged a split second behind. Someone had painted over my reality with pixels. "We need an eyewitness," Sophia said flatly. "Something no one can edit." I knew exactly where to go. Mrs. Patterson in 20C never missed a thing. 78 retired librarian, 2 Persian cats, and a brass peephole she polished like an heirloom. She'd spent decades cataloging hallway comings and goings with the precision of a reference desk. She ushered us in before I even knocked twice. "I keep a log," she said, pulling a neat notebook from under a lace runner. Each date was carefully written in fountain pen. She flipped to mid-May. "This day when you were at a Boston conference, your husband left with 2 suitcases, said he'd be gone a while, helped me carry groceries too." The words chilled me. Aiden hated vague statements. He measured language like currency. She turned more pages. "And in July, he walked different. Your husband favors his left knee on stairs." This one didn't. Sophia snapped photos of every page. Mrs. Patterson's memory might fade, but her habits didn't. We left with more than testimony. We left with proof. Back in my apartment, Sophia tapped her tablet. "I'll pull unaltered backups from the building's system, but Ava, you need to test the man you're living with." I knew what she meant. The one test no imposter could fake: shrimp. The real Aiden carried an EpiPen everywhere, 3 ER visits in 7 years, each one terrifying. His shellfish allergy wasn't a preference. It was a death sentence. I set shrimp pasta and garlic on the counter. The plan felt cold, almost clinical. I wasn't cooking dinner. I was running an experiment. At 5:28, right on schedule, the door clicked. "Something smells amazing," he said, voice warm, casual. "Tuesday feast. Thought we deserved a treat," I answered, stirring the linguine. We ate at the island knees, brushing like always. He twirled pasta, lifted a shrimp, and smiled. "You haven't made this in years." He took the bite. Nothing. No panic, no swelling throat, no gasp for air. Just satisfaction. "Delicious," he said easily. I forced myself to nod my fork untouched. Inside, my heart slammed. The man across from me wasn't my husband. He was someone who could eat shrimp, praise it, and talk about visiting his mother like it was a vacation. The real Aiden would rather face a firing squad than a weekend gardening with his mother. This man offered to call her himself. My phone, hidden behind the fruit bowl, blinked a steady red dot, capturing every word. Evidence. By 10, he was snoring softly back, turned shoulders rising and falling with the rhythm of a man unburdened. The real Aiden had insomnia, always reading until midnight, the lamp casting a warm square of light on his side of the bed. I waited until his breaths evened out, then slipped free. The carpet was cool under my feet. The apartment hushed, except for the city's distant hum. Beside the dresser sat his briefcase, leather-worn smooth, Aiden's briefcase, or the imposter's prop. I crouched, pressed the clasp. It opened with a soft click. Inside, laptop files, business cards. Normal, but beneath them an envelope waited. My hands trembled as I slid it free. A pay stub to Marcus Webb, an actor's union card, and Paige's handwritten notes about me. My coffee habits, the way I talked to my sister, the exact date of our anniversary, even the movies that made me cry. Every detail of my marriage reduced to bullet points, as if my life had been rehearsed like a role in a play. At the bottom, one line in different handwriting: 3 months maximum. Maintain cover until transfer complete. Transfer. Of money. Of assets. Of me. I photographed everything with Sophia's encrypted phone, then slid it back into place. The man sleeping in my bed wasn't my husband. He was Marcus Webb, a failed actor. And I had just found the script he was using to play my life. By the time the sun slid across the blinds, the briefcase was back under the dresser, and the imposter was still snoring, like a man without a care in the world. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, repeating one truth over and over in my mind. The man breathing next to me is not my husband. And if he wasn't Aiden, then I wasn't his wife. I was his audience, his test, his mark. The actor stirred at 7:02, exactly when Aiden used to stretching with practiced ease. He kissed my forehead, muttered something about heading to the gym, and padded into the bathroom. I smiled when he left. The performance was still running smoothly, but I was no longer a spectator. I was writing the ending. Sophia arrived an hour later, black coffee in one hand, tablet in the other. Her sharp eyes scanned my face, looking for cracks. "You didn't sleep," she said. I found the script. My voice was calm, but my chest still buzzed with adrenaline. I showed her the photos, the pay stub, the notes, the instructions. She swore under her breath. "So it's Marcus Webb. I'll dig into him background debts connections." "But Ava—" She tapped the words, "maintain cover until transfer complete." "This isn't just adultery or fraud, it's bigger. Someone invested serious money in this." "I know," I said. "That's why I need more than evidence. I need witnesses." Sophia's brow lifted. "Who do you trust enough to bring in?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in years. Grace Morrison. Grace and I had met in a courtroom back when she was a razor-sharp prosecutor, and I was the expert witness who could sync a defense team with 3 spreadsheets. She'd left the DA's office after a messy divorce, but she still knew how to smell blood. She answered groggily, her voice thick with sleep. "Ava." "I need you," I said. "Today. It's federal, it's financial, and it's personal. Can you meet me in an hour?" Something in my tone must have carried because she didn't hesitate. "Text me the address. I'll be there." By noon, the 3 of us sat around my dining table, the same one where Marcus had eaten shrimp scampi the night before like a man immune to death. Grace leafed through the photos, her lawyer's brain clicking audibly. "This isn't just identity theft. This is corporate espionage. If those stolen client files are connected to trades, we're talking insider trading on a massive scale. He'll go down hard, but only if we can prove it." "That's the problem," I said. "Everything is in Aiden's name, the real Aiden. He's the one moving the money. Marcus is just camouflage. Camouflage that puts him at the scene," Grace countered. "Judges don't like imposters sleeping in their jurisdiction. Juries like them even less." Sophia leaned forward. "So what's the play?" I looked at both of them. 2 women who had fought their own wars against betrayal. 2 women who hadn't flinched when I laid my nightmare bare. "We play along," I said. "We let Marcus believe I'm fooled. Meanwhile, I'll bait Aiden into making one mistake too many." Grace's mouth curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And when he does, we'll be ready. That evening, Marcus returned from the gym, hair damp, demeanor flawless. I was at the stove again, chopping onions with studied calm. He slipped into character as easily as pulling on a jacket. "How was your day?" he asked, his accent crisp. "Busy," I said lightly, "but productive." I kissed his cheek the way I always had, ignoring the tremor of revulsion under my skin. He smelled faintly of cologne, not Aiden's usual brand. Another seam in the costume. Over dinner, I suggested something I knew would twist the knife. "Our anniversary's coming up. What if we throw a little party, invite your colleagues, make it special?" His fork paused for half a beat before he smiled again. "That sounds lovely." Lovely. Always that word. My husband never used it. I excused myself to the kitchen phone hidden in my apron. I texted Sophia. "He's on the hook." Later, when Marcus settled on the couch with a glass of wine, I sat beside him, resting my head on his shoulder. To anyone else, we were the picture of domestic comfort. Inside, my mind ticked like a metronome, counting down to the trap I was building. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his executioner. The morning after Grace joined our circle, I brewed coffee with hands that felt steadier than they should. The apartment looked the same: mahogany desk, wedding photos, neatly stacked newspapers, but everything had shifted. The stage was set, and every actor had their role. Marcus thought he was still delivering a flawless performance. I was about to rewrite the script. He left for work at 8:15 sharp, suit, pressed tie, perfect kiss, dropped lightly on my cheek. The moment the door shut, I opened my laptop and began the calls. First was Robert Steinberg, Aiden's largest client, a man who trusted spreadsheets more than spouses. I kept my tone light casual, just a fellow professional raising a small flag. "Robert, I noticed something unusual in your portfolio while reviewing adjacent accounts. Probably nothing, maybe a clerical error, but you'll want your team to check." His voice tightened immediately. "Send me the details." Hook planted. Next was Jennifer Wu at Phoenix Capital. Different tactic, same seed. "Jennifer, a mysterious transfer popped up yesterday." Odd timing, nothing to panic over, but it might be worth a glance. And then David Martinez from Meridian Financial. By the time I hung up, 3 powerful firms had reason to scrutinize every move tied to Aidan Mercer's credentials, the kind of scrutiny that spreads fast and bites deep. Sophia texted an update, got unaltered building backups, tampering confirmed, hash mismatches clean as day. We've got digital proof now. I allowed myself a small smile. Piece by piece, the walls were closing in. That evening, Marcus came home later than usual. His smile was intact, but his eyes flicked nervously as he set down his briefcase. Traffic was awful, he said too quickly. I tilted my head. Funny, I checked the traffic cams pretty clear on Lexington tonight. For a flicker of a second, his mask slipped. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. Must have been a different route. Long day. He kissed my forehead and went to shower. The British accent was flawless, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. The performance was cracking. Over dinner, I poured him a glass of Malbec, watching as he declined with a forced laugh. Not tonight. Stomach's off. Another inconsistency. My husband never turned down wine, especially on a Sunday night. So I said sweetly, I'm planning that anniversary party. Tuesday morning before the markets open. Invite your colleagues, your biggest clients. Make it sound urgent. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. Tuesday morning, I nodded, feigning enthusiasm. It'll be memorable. Different. They'll love it. He hesitated, then forced the smile back on. If that's what you want. I leaned over, kissed his cheek, and whispered, It's exactly what I want. When he retreated to the living room, I slipped into the bedroom and texted Grace, He's sending invites tonight. Be ready. Her reply came instantly. FBI wants confirmation. Tomorrow morning they move. I slid the phone under the pillow, heart hammering. Tomorrow the curtain would fall. At midnight, I pretended to sleep while Marcus paced the living room. His silhouette stretched long against the blinds, restless. He checked his phone, scrolled furiously, then tapped out messages with sharp, impatient strokes. He was unraveling, and I let him. When he finally came to bed, his breathing was shallow, uneven. The man who once read until insomnia surrendered, now tossed like a restless child. I stared at the ceiling, knowing dawn would deliver the reckoning. The next morning, I dressed deliberately in a navy suit, the one I wore testifying in fraud cases. Power in cloth, clarity in color. Marcus watched me over breakfast, suspicion shadowing his features. You're glowing, he said lightly. Just excited, I answered, smiling back. Today's going to be unforgettable. His hand tightened on the coffee mug, knuckles pale. For the first time, the actor seemed to realize the play was no longer his. The hours before a storm always feel strangest. The sky hangs heavy, waiting. Air tastes different. Every sound feels amplified. That was how my apartment felt on Monday evening, the night before everything would end. Marcus, or rather the man pretending to be my husband, wasn't himself. He came home from work with his tie, loose eyes darting as if he'd been scanning crowds. He dropped his briefcase harder than usual, the thud echoing through the quiet space. Long day, I asked, voice light, steady. Yeah, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. He poured himself water but left it untouched on the counter. The mask was slipping. While he showered, I stepped onto the balcony and called Grace on the encrypted phone Sophia had given me. The city hummed beneath me, oblivious. They're ready, Grace said. FBI will be outside your building by 7:30. Once the guests arrive, they'll come in. You just need to keep him in the apartment until then. Understood, I whispered. And Ava Grace paused. Don't try to be the hero. Let the system crush him. Your job is to survive it. I promised her I would, but in my chest I knew survival wasn't enough. I wanted him exposed, humiliated, every lie dragged into daylight. When I stepped back inside, Marcus was standing in the living room, hair damp, watching me with narrowed eyes. Who were you talking to? He asked. My sister. I lied smoothly, slipping my phone into my pocket. She wanted to know if you'd finally agreed to take that trip with her flight benefits. He studied me for a beat too long, then forced a smile. Maybe someday. I busied myself with dinner roast chicken, simple comforting. My hands moved automatically, but my thoughts were racing ahead, tomorrow's gathering, the agents, the witnesses, the trap springing shut. Marcus barely touched his food. He kept checking his phone, scrolling through messages he tried to hide. At one point, he excused himself to the bathroom phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. When he returned, I decided to test his composure one last time. "Do you remember our honeymoon?" I asked softly. He blinked clearly, caught off guard. "Of course. Santorini, dancing by the water." I smiled. My real honeymoon had been in Amalfi, not Santorini. I'd invented Santorini weeks ago as a planted detail waiting for this moment. He passed the test in the worst way by failing it. "That was the best night of my life," I said sweetly. "We should go back someday." His shoulders loosened. He thought he'd gotten it right. Inside, I filed away another crack in his performance. After dinner, we settled on the couch. I let my head rest against his shoulder, even as my skin crawled. He scrolled through Netflix, offering the same rehearsed chuckles, the same gentle comments. To an outsider, we looked like a couple winding down after dinner. But my phone, hidden beneath the throw pillow, was recording every word. At 10:00, he finally spoke. "You've been different lately." I kept my expression neutral. "Different how more watchful." He glanced at me, eyes sharp. "Like you're waiting for something." I forced a laugh. "Maybe I'm just tired." For a moment his mask slipped again. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. Then he plastered on the smile. "Then get some rest. Big day tomorrow." Big day indeed. He fell asleep quickly, as he always did, too quickly, like a man who'd trained himself to mimic rest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. At midnight, I slipped from the bed and opened my laptop in the office. Sophia's encrypted channel blinked with new files, unaltered security footage, financial records, cross-referenced trades. A dossier thick enough to bury anyone, even a man like Aiden Mercer. I scrolled through the evidence line after line, photo after photo. My chest burned not with grief anymore, but with clarity. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about justice. By 2 a.m., the city outside had quieted. I stood at the window watching the lights of Midtown fade, knowing the next sunrise would mark the end of the performance. Tomorrow the actor would face his final audience, and the curtain would come down. The morning air in Manhattan carried that crisp bite of autumn, the kind that makes people hurry to their destinations. Inside my apartment, the table gleamed with champagne flutes and pastries, every detail arranged to look like a celebration. To anyone walking in, it would seem festive. To me, it was a crime scene waiting for its climax. Marcus hovered near the window, adjusting his tie for the third time. His smile was tight-forced. "You're sure this is necessary?" he asked, pretending to sound amused. "Of course," I said, placing a tray of croissants on the table. "Our anniversary deserves something memorable. And what better way than with your colleagues?" He chuckled, but the sound rang hollow. His hands fiddled with his cufflinks a beat too long. He was nervous. By 7:30, the first knock came. Robert Steinberg entered, frowning but polite, shaking Marcus's hand before glancing around with confusion. "I canceled a breakfast meeting for this, Aiden. What's so urgent?" Marcus laughed too loudly. "All in good time. Grab a drink." Minutes later, Jennifer Wu arrived, heels clicking across the hardwood, followed by David Martinez and 2 junior partners from the firm. Soon the living room filled with murmurs, people sipping champagne while exchanging puzzled glances. I moved among them with practiced grace, hostess smile firmly in place. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a single word from Grace here. FBI was in the building. I glanced at Marcus. Sweat had formed at his temples, though he tried to disguise it with a napkin swipe. He raised his glass, preparing to speak. His eyes darted to me as if searching for a cue. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. His accent was steady, but his voice wavered ever so slightly. "It means a great deal to celebrate with family, friends, and valued colleagues." Robert frowned deeper. "Celebrate what exactly?" Before Marcus could answer, the knock came. Firm, decisive. Then another louder. The room stilled. Marcus's eyes widened, his mask cracked. I walked calmly to the door and opened it. 6 federal agents stepped inside, credentials raised. "FBI," the lead agent announced, voice carrying across the stunned room. "We have a warrant for Aiden Mercer." The executives gasped, coffee cups clinking against saucers. Marcus froze, his face paling as the words sank in. "I'm Aiden Mercer," he said quickly, desperate to maintain the illusion. The lead agent's eyes didn't blink. "No, Mr. Webb, we know exactly who you are." The room erupted with whispers. Jennifer Wu covered her mouth in shock. David Martinez muttered something under his breath, and Robert Steinberg looked like he'd been punched. Marcus's shoulders slumped. The British accent fell away, replaced by raw Brooklyn. "I want to cooperate," he said, his voice breaking. "I have evidence. I was hired. I can prove it." The agents moved swiftly, cuffing him as the murmurs grew louder. Papers on the table rustled as if even the documents wanted to recoil from the spectacle. One of the junior partners whispered, "My God, all those meetings, all a lie." I stood straighter, my voice clear. "This is why I asked you here. You all deserve to know the truth. The man you've been working with isn't Aiden. He's an actor hired to impersonate him, while the real Aiden attempted to disappear with millions of stolen funds." Gasps echoed. Phones came out, some to record, others to call their legal teams. The scene had transformed from confusion to chaos. The lead agent turned to me. "Mrs. Mercer, we'll need a full statement. Your evidence is central to this case." I nodded, calm washing over me at last. "You'll have everything you need." Marcus looked at me as they led him toward the door. Not with anger, not even with hatred. With something closer to gratitude, as if being caught had finally freed him from the worst role of his life. When the door shut behind them, silence hung heavy. The executives stared at me, realization dawning that they had nearly been dragged into a web of fraud. Robert Steinberg was the first to break the silence. "You figured it out," he said slowly. "You stopped him." I met his gaze steady. "Numbers don't lie." "People do. And now you know which is which." The FBI agents moved quickly, collecting documents, securing devices, turning my home into a crime scene. But for me, it was no longer a home. It was a stage where the final act had just concluded. Tomorrow would bring questions, headlines, and testimony. But tonight, as the agents worked and the witnesses whispered, I allowed myself a moment of stillness. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen. By the time the agents finished sweeping my apartment, dawn had rolled into mid-morning. The champagne glasses still sat half empty on the table, abandoned by clients who left in shock. My living room smelled faintly of espresso and fear. I made coffee black and strong more out of habit than need. Every nerve in my body hummed, unwilling to calm. Then my phone buzzed a message from Kay, my sister. They got him. Attached was a photo. Blurry, hurried, but unmistakable. Charles de Gaulle Airport. My husband, the real Aiden Mercer, pressed against the polished tile floor, French police kneeling on his back, his tailored suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled. Another photo, Madison Vale mascara streaking down her cheeks as two officers led her away, her diamond bracelet catching the airport lights. My stomach twisted. For months, they had lived like ghosts in my life, stealing, scheming, preparing to vanish, and now they were caught in the brightest light of all public arrest. The news spread like wildfire. By noon, financial networks were replaying the footage on a loop. Grainy cell phone video showed Aiden trying to run through the VIP lounge before police tackled him in front of startled travelers. Commentators called it the scandal of the year. Anchors speculated about the size of the fraud. Experts dissected every detail of the scheme. I sat on the couch, coffee cooling in my hands, watching the man I'd once promised forever to being paraded in handcuffs. For 7 years, I thought his composure was strength. Now I saw it for what it was, performance. Without his mask, he looked small, almost pitiful. The phone rang again, Grace this time. Her voice was sharp with triumph. French authorities confirmed extradition. He'll face charges here. Between your evidence, Marcus's cooperation, and the frozen accounts, they won't be able to spin it. What about Madison, I asked. Accessory, maybe conspiracy. She'll turn on him if she's smart. I exhaled slowly. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from release. That night, I sat alone at the dining table, the same place where I'd first learned to doubt, to question, to test. The shrimp test. The honeymoon lie. The briefcase with its cruelly detailed script. Each step had been agony. Each discovery, another knife. But now the knives were in his back, carried by men in uniforms broadcast across the world. I thought of Mrs. Patterson watching through her peephole of Sophia bent over her tablet of grace, arriving rumpled but fierce. Women who had stood beside me when my life tilted. Women who refused to let me be silenced. And I thought of Marcus Webb, the failed actor, now federal witness, who had admitted defeat in my living room. He had played the part of my husband, but he had also exposed the truth Aiden's scheme was too big, too reckless, too doomed to survive. When the clock struck midnight, I turned off the TV. Silence settled over the apartment. For the first time in months, it wasn't suffocating. I walked to the window and stared at the skyline. The city glowed as always, indifferent to one man's downfall. Somewhere across the ocean, my husband sat in a cell, stripped of his designer suits, his passwords, his illusions. I whispered into the glass to the reflection of a woman who had survived. "You lost, Aiden. You finally lost." And with that, I let the first tear fall. Not for him, but for the years I'd wasted believing the performance. The apartment no longer felt like mine. The walls held too many echoes of laughter that had been rehearsed, of dinners that had been staged, of lies whispered in the dark. By the time the movers carried the last box out, the place looked stripped hollow. Just pale rectangles on the walls where pictures once hung the ghost of a life I thought I had. I handed the keys to the building manager with a calm I hadn't expected. This chapter of my life didn't deserve tears. It deserved closure. My new office sat in a narrow brick building in the Flatiron District, the kind of place startups usually rented. On the brass plate outside the frosted glass door were the words, "Chin Forensic Consulting." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Marital Asset Protection and Identity Verification." Clients trickled in at first. A surgeon who suspected her husband of faking business trips. A Broadway producer worried about a spouse with too many alibis. Each story felt painfully familiar. Each time I sat across from a new client, I recognized the same mix of dread and disbelief I had carried. And each time I gave them the one thing I'd needed most proof. The work grew quickly. Word spread. Within months, I had a waiting list. I had built something out of ashes, an enterprise that turned betrayal into empowerment. Kay remained my anchor. My sister would call between flights, her voice steady through the crackle of long-distance connections. We met weekly at Giovanni's, the old Italian place with checkered tablecloths and duct-taped booths. The food was the same, the wine still cheap, but the ritual healed us. One night she slid an envelope across the table. Marcus Webb's handwriting careful and contrite. His letter thanked me for sparing him harsher charges, told me he was teaching acting students in Ohio, now warned them that not every role was worth playing. I tucked the letter away. Marcus had been a pawn, but at least he found redemption in honesty. Aiden never would. Sometimes late at night, I replayed the footage of his arrest in Paris. Not out of cruelty, but as a reminder. The man who once seemed untouchable was reduced to a headline, a cautionary tale. His millions frozen, his mistress gone, his reputation destroyed. But even then, I felt no triumph, only a sober clarity. Betrayal doesn't vanish with an arrest. It lingers, teaching you which parts of yourself were illusions, which parts were steel. One afternoon, a client asked me if I ever regretted it, digging so deep, pulling every string until the web collapsed. I thought for a long time before answering. "No," I said finally, "because the truth doesn't destroy, it reveals. What you do after, that's what defines you." As she left, I caught my reflection in the office glass door. Same auburn hair, same green eyes, but sharper now, clearer. Not the same woman who once served shrimp scampi just to test a lie. I didn't know what my future held. Love felt distant, abstract. But freedom was enough for now. Freedom and the work I had built. That night over wine at Giovanni's, Kay raised her glass. To the woman who turned betrayal into power. I smiled, clinking my glass against hers. To the sister who saved me with one phone call. The wine tasted like survival, like rebirth. For the first time in months, maybe years, I let myself believe that I wasn't defined by the man who betrayed me. I was defined by how I had risen after. The rain tapped against my office window in steady rhythms, the kind of gray New York afternoon that blurred hours into each other. I had just finished filing documents from one client when the intercom buzzed. My assistant's voice came through cautious. "There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she looks desperate." I paused, staring at the neat stacks of paper on my desk. desperation that had been me once. I told her to send the woman in. A tall brunette stepped through the door, her coat dripping from the storm. She looked around the office as if expecting it to vanish, then clutched her purse like a lifeline. "My name is Rebecca Harrison," she said, her voice tight. "CEO of Luminar Tech. I recognized the name immediately. Tech startup, darling, the kind that made headlines for billion-dollar valuations and miracle software." "What brings you here, Ms. Harrison?" I asked, gesturing to the chair across from me. She sat, trembling hands smoothing her skirt. "It's my husband. I think he's using artificial intelligence to fake his business trips. He tells me he's in Tokyo or Berlin, but when I check the timestamps on his emails or the backgrounds in his calls, something feels off." Her words jolted something deep inside me. Deep fakes. Manufactured realities. The same weapons that had been turned against me were now appearing in someone else's marriage. "I need proof," Rebecca whispered, "before he ruins me and my company." I listened carefully, taking notes, just as I had with embezzlers and fraudsters years ago. But this wasn't just about a fortune or a corporation. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of living inside a lie. "I can help you," I said finally. The words carried weight. They weren't a promise of comfort, but of clarity. "But you need to be ready. The truth doesn't always look the way you want it to." Rebecca nodded. "I already lost myself once building this company. I won't lose it again to a man who can't tell me the truth." Her determination mirrored mine months ago. That recognition sparked something fierce in me. After she left, I stood at the window watching the city pulse with restless energy. I thought about how betrayal had once shattered me, how I had pieced myself back together, one fragment at a time. And now those fragments formed tools, sharp enough to cut through other people's deceptions. This wasn't just a job, it was purpose. That evening, Kay called from her hotel in San Francisco. Her voice carried the familiar exhaustion of long flights, but softened when she asked, "Rough day?" "Not rough," I said, glancing at the empty chair across from my desk where Rebecca had sat. "Challenging, but in a way that matters." Silence stretched warm and unspoken. Kay finally said, "I'm proud of you, Ava. You turned the worst thing that ever happened into something powerful. For a long time I had resisted words like that. Pride, power, strength. They felt foreign, heavy, but now they fit." "Thanks, sis," I said softly. "You're the reason I got here." When I hung up, I opened a fresh case file, Rebecca's name typed neatly at the top. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean, glistening under neon lights. Tomorrow I would start digging into emails, into call logs, into the fragile seams of her husband's stories. Somewhere in the data, the truth waited, and I would find it. Because that was who I had become, not a betrayed wife, not a victim of deception, but a woman who unearthed lies and replaced them with light. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, the kind of scent that clings to places where truth and lies are forced to wrestle. I sat at the witness stand, hands folded neatly answering questions, with the precision of someone who had made a career out of exposing fraud. Across the room, Aiden sat in his prison-issued suit thinner, now his posture less commanding. He avoided my eyes, as if seeing me would remind him of everything he had lost. When the trial ended, the verdict came swiftly guilty on multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The judge's gavel struck, and with it 7 years of my life with him closed like a book. But strangely, I didn't feel the swell of triumph I thought I would. Watching him led away in handcuffs, I realized revenge wasn't about destroying someone else. It was about reclaiming myself. Walking out of the courthouse, the sunlight felt warmer than it had in months. Grace walked beside me, her hand briefly squeezing mine in silent solidarity. "It's over," she said. But I shook my head. "No, it's transformed." Because the truth was, nothing ends cleanly. The scars remain, and so do the choices, what to do with the anger, the betrayal, the hollow spaces left behind. That evening, I found myself back at Giovanni's with Kay. Our booth by the window had become our sanctuary. She ordered inguine vongole, I ordered penne arrabbiata, and for a while we let the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation fill the silence. Finally, Kay leaned forward. So what now, Ava? Do you hold on to this forever? Or do you let it go? Her words hit me harder than I expected. For months I had carried rage like armor. It had kept me sharp, kept me alive. But armor is heavy. I thought of the Bible verse that had carried me through the darkest nights, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. The truth had set me free from the lie of my marriage, but freedom also meant I no longer had to chain myself to hate. What is done in the dark will come to light, I said softly, quoting the old proverb. And it did. He destroyed himself. I don't need to carry him anymore. Kay's eyes shone with quiet pride. That sounds like forgiveness, I nodded. Not for him, for me. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing. It meant I refused to let his betrayal define the rest of my life. Over the next months, I poured myself into my new firm. Women from across the country sought my help, bringing me their tangled webs of deceit, asking me to help them see clearly again. Each time I felt a kind of holy responsibility, not just to uncover the lies, but to remind them they weren't alone. One client, a woman named Eleanor, wept in my office when I handed her the proof of her husband's hidden accounts. "You saved me," she said. But I shook my head. "No. You saved yourself. I just handed you the light." And in those words, I realized I had found something greater than justice. I had found purpose. Months later, I returned to the ocean for the first time since everything fell apart. Standing barefoot on the sand, I let the waves wash over my feet, carrying away footprints with every crash and retreat. The sea has a way of reminding you that nothing is permanent, not grief, not anger, not even betrayal. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, not for Aiden, not even for Madison, but for myself, for my sister, for every woman who has had her world ripped apart by lies, a prayer of release, of peace, of forgiveness. And in that moment, the bitterness finally loosened its grip. Dear listener, if you've followed me through this journey, you know this was more than a story about betrayal. This was about truth, resilience, and the quiet strength that rises when everything else falls away. We call these true revenge stories, but sometimes the real revenge isn't about retaliation. It's about rebuilding, about refusing to let the darkness win. So I ask you, what was the moment in this story that shook you the most? Was it when my sister saw my husband in Paris living a double life? Was it when I served shrimp scampi to the man pretending to be him? Or was it when I chose forgiveness, not because he deserved it, but because I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from. Every story, every perspective adds to the truth we're uncovering together. And remember this, whatever lies may surround you, whatever betrayal you might face, the truth will come to light. And when it does, it won't just set you free, it will give you the chance to write a new story. So if this journey spoke to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because someone out there needs to hear these words tonight. Someone out there is waiting for proof that they can rise again, and maybe, just maybe, your story will be the next one we tell.